Hi, my name's John Twigg, and you're watching Talk About here on Shaw TV North Island. I've got another interesting, great guest actually for you today, Andrew Nikiforuk. Andrew.
John, my pleasure.
Well, my pleasure too. Second time that you've been on the show.
And now I'm actually a resident of Campbell River.
That's the first question.
Yes.
Well, actually, it says you're 60 years old, but I relate because I'm close to 67 now. Time is flying. But, you know, we're both still kicking butt in a little ways, and you in big ways. But why did you choose to live in Campbell River? You were born in Ontario, you became famous and successful in Calgary.
Largely because of the experience my wife and I had when I was writer-in-residence at the Haig Brown House.
Yes.
And we were surprised by how much we enjoyed living here. And we were here for 4 months in the depth of winter, and
yeah, that's amazing too. Because I was thinking, oh yeah, of course it's nice in the summer here.
no, and we just found the place to be civil,
Yeah.
and pleasant and engaging, and lots of interesting, wonderful people.
Easy to get around in.
Easy to get around in. We fell in love with the place, and my wife was also born by the ocean, so she comes from northern Scotland, in the Hebrides, and she was born on an island. And I've kept her landlocked for more than 25 years, so it just seemed
That's weird.
like the right thing to do.
My mother's family comes from the Hebrides too, back in the 1800s. But wow, okay, yeah, it's a special place up there.
As it is here.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you've done a lot of journalism, but I lost count of the number of books.
So have I, John.
It was your website, which by the way is an excellent website, andrewnikiforuk.com.
That's correct.
Suggested there's 10 books, but is there more?
You know, John, I haven't really sat down and counted them all up.
Well, please do that.
Maybe someday I might, but
no. Do you derive your income from that, or is it the journalism?
It's largely from journalism,
Yeah.
and from public speaking. It's very difficult to make a living by writing books in this country. It
or
really
anywhere.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's an industry that is changing rapidly.
Yeah. So your latest book, thank you, Gord. I'll hold it up a good long time. Slickwater. Why did you write another book?
Well, this book is kind of the end of a trilogy of books I wrote on Alberta. So I started off with a book called Saboteurs, which is a story of Wiebo Ludwig and his fight against the oil and gas industry in northern Alberta. And then I followed that up with a book called Tar Sands, which was really a book that looked at questioned the pace and scale of bitumen mining in northern Alberta.
You say bitumen, other people say bitumen.
Yeah, it depends on whether you're Canadian or American.
Okay.
Right? I guess American, you would say bitumen.
Okay.
And then this is the final book in that trilogy about the energy industry, and this one is about hydraulic fracturing.
Yeah. Now, the Campbell River Mirror's Mike Davies had a pretty good write-up on this in the November 18th paper, so this interview is not a scoop, but this book is really a portrait of courage, Nikiforuk says. I originally thought the book was going to be about groundwater contamination and regulatory fraud, unquote, but it became more about the woman fighting these wrongs than the wrongs themselves. I think that's a pretty good analysis.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, I mean, there's been a lot written about fracking.
Yeah.
And if you don't put a human face on the story, then why would anyone actually want to read that story?
Yeah. And the woman is Jessica Ernst, and she spoke in Courtney 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing story. She works in the oil industry. She's got a nice little rural property with a well on it. The well gets polluted by the oil and gas industry operating around here. She fights back.
Yep.
What a story.
Well, and the story is ongoing. So when she started to fight back, and she wasn't fighting, what she was basically doing was asking questions of the regulator about why they were not upholding the law and why they were allowing, in Canada in this case, to shallow frack into coal seams around Rosebud, Alberta,
Yeah.
with the result that aquifers were contaminated with methane.
Didn't she go to court at some point?
Well, she has. She's now, so when the regulators refused to answer her questions, as well as the government failed to do even a proper investigation. And to this day, John, the government of Alberta does not have a protocol for investigating groundwater contamination in a province that has more than 500,000 wells, oil and gas wells drilled, right? So, I mean, this is really bad.
Yeah.
So, at a certain point, Jessica realized that she would not get the regulator or the government to do the right thing unless she went to court.
Yeah.
And so she sued the government of Alberta. She sued Encana and the regulator for
when was the
$33
first
million.
lawsuit?
It started in 2008, I believe.
I thought it was earlier, but
It might have been 2007, but she didn't go public with it until 2011.
okay.
Okay. So it essentially has now been in the courts for about 8 years.
Yeah.
And of course, government and industry have been fighting her tooth and nail.
Yeah.
And she's yet gotten to the point where she has shown any evidence or put any evidence on the table.
I'm going to interject there. As in my own journalism, I have encountered more than a few cases where the government's response is simply delay until the litigants die
Yes,
or run out of money.
That's the strategy.
Yeah.
So that's, in this case, I mean, so what she's done, to really appreciate what she's done.
Yeah.
So let's put it in American terms, and then Canadians usually get it, actually.
Yeah.
So what she's doing in terms of suing Encana, the Alberta government, and its energy regulator is like suing ExxonMobil in the United States and the government of Texas and the Railroad Commission, its energy. You know,
Yeah.
these are all big players. They have
Yeah.
huge resources and armies of lawyers. And her case is a real threat because she has such good documented evidence. I mean, she's a trained scientist.
What's your science?
Biology.
Okay.
So she was an environmental consultant in the oil patch for nearly
Right.
25 years, and she worked for companies like Murphy Oil and Encana and Chevron and the Great Canadian Oil Sands Company. She was well known and highly respected for her work and the meticulous nature of her work. So she has used all of those skills to document the breaking of laws in Alberta, and also to document this extraordinary liability that exists in the oil patch today. And that is, they have a problem with leaking oil and gas wells.
Yeah.
Right? So more than 5 million wells have been
Yeah.
drilled in North America since the 1850s.
And the percentage is?
Well, of leakers,
Yes.
it can range all over the map. So
But it's
of
not
heavy
like-
leakers, I think in British Columbia, it's more than 10%. In other jurisdictions, it's as high as 5%. In the Gulf of Mexico, it is, I think 60% of all wells are leaking in the Gulf after a period of 15 to 20 years.
Before we went on recorded air here, we were talking about a situation in Alberta where it's something like 50%.
Well, you can find, in certain fields,
Yes.
you can find leakage rates as high as that.
Yeah.
And it depends on the nature of the formations that were being entered,
Yeah.
the kind of cement jobs that were being done, as well as whether or not horizontal drilling was being applied.
Yeah. Is
Because
horizontal
cement's-
worst?
Well, horizontal is a real problem, and they discovered this in the 1950s because you're just not going down straight and then you just put your cement seal around the
Yeah.
wellbore. When you're going like this, your cement, once it goes down there, starts to move and slough off to
Yeah.
one side. So you don't have a really good seal.
Yeah.
So that's an existing problem in the industry. It's been there
Yeah.
for years.
Yeah.
And both oil and gas wells will leak methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas.
Yes.
And then you introduce this technology called hydraulic fracturing, which is all about brute force and ignorance, and that is literally shaking the ground and shaking all of the oil and gas infrastructure already there in place.
Yeah.
So you have a technology that's actually aggravating the leaking problem.
Yeah.
And Jessica Ernst has pretty well documented how that worked in Rosebud
No
as
wonder
well.
they want to keep it suppressed.
Well, yes, because it all comes down to big money at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
So.
yeah. When you were on last time, I was defending deep fracking, and BC's never had a problem with any of its deep fracks. Well, that's perhaps still somewhat true, but there's
I would argue that's not true,
Okay.
and I would argue it's not true. Number
Well-
one, because they're not doing the monitoring.
That's where I was going.
That would,
Yeah.
and I
Is
would
that-
also say the leaks. The other issue is that the leaks are not coming from the deep source that is being fracked. The leaks are coming from the middle of the well bore. And so then that's much closer to groundwater and the surface.
Yeah, but the point I wanted to get to was that in times past, perhaps we could rely on the bureaucrats to supervise the industry. But in modern times, after Gordon Campbell, there's fewer bureaucrats to monitor, and even those that do get less support from the deputy minister and the minister and all that. Is that true?
I think that's true, and I think here in BC you've got a bigger problem in the sense that the government has become a cheerleader for the LNG industry and the fracking industry.
Yeah.
And that's, at that point in time, then any critical thought sort of goes out the window, and this explains why you can have someone like Rich Coleman saying, you know, we've got oil and gas wells in BC that don't leak. Well,
he's the energy minister.
Yeah, and you know, and
No,
anyone
actually,
in the industry would be laughing.
He used to be the energy
He's
minister.
the Ministry
now
of Natural Gas Development.
Yeah, because there isn't. Yeah.
So.
So anyway, I kind of took you off course. We were talking about our litigation, and
Yes.
Where's it stand now?
Well, as it now stands, her case against Encana and the Alberta government is slowly proceeding through the courts. So the court said, yes, you can sue these guys, and off you go. The court said, though, you can't sue the regulator because the regulator has an immunity clause. And then Jessica Ernst said, well, that's not right because the regulator, to me, is the most guilty party. They covered up something here that they should not have covered up.
So she has to go to the Supreme Court of Canada?
She has to now go to the Supreme Court of Canada, where the issue boils down to basically this. Can a regulator, any regulator in the country, with an immunity clause, still be absolved of wrongdoing when it comes to violating Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms? So in Jessica Ernst's case, the regulator falsely accused her of being a security threat, banished all communication with her for 6 months, and then admitted to her in a taped interview that they never considered her a security threat, but she had humiliated them in public with her criticisms, right? So
how dare you speak truth to power?
That's right. So that is now what is going to be heard before the Supreme Court.
It's not funny.
It's a big issue.
Yeah.
So can any regulator in this country violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and get away with it because they have an immunity clause? And that's the issue.
Or they made major donations to the government in power, or the party that's in power.
Yeah, but this is a legal issue here for these guys.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, only 10% of all applications actually make it to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Her application did, and it will be heard in early January.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I noticed, I think it was in the Mirror write-up, the Nikiforuk is also committed to donating 15% of the proceeds from the sale of Slickwater toward her ever-mounting legal fees.
That's correct.
That's very nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do when I spent 3 years writing this book and documenting it, and then you realize, okay, the evidence is extraordinary, and this is such a miscarriage of justice at this point in time that, of course, yes, I mean, so 15% of the proceeds is actually a big chunk of the royalties.
Is that net or gross to quibble?
That's gross.
Awesome.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Your publisher is
Greystone Books.
Are they okay with that, or is that your share?
They were kind of shocked that I would do that, but I said, no, this is what we're doing. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've won a bunch of awards. Here it is. Andrew Nikiforuk is an award-winning Canadian journalist who has been writing about the oil and gas industry for more than 2 decades. A winner of the Rachel Carson Environmental Book Award, he was one of the first journalists in North America to document the devastating effects of hydraulic fracturing. Didn't you get a Governor General's Award or something, too?
Yeah. Many, many years ago.
What was that about?
That was for the book Saboteurs, for the book about Wiebo Ludwig.
Okay. Now, when you were at the museum, I bought another book, and forgive me, at 66 3/4. I can't remember the title, but it was fascinating. It was
Energy of Slaves or Empire of the Beetle?
No, Energy of Slaves. That's the one where you go into Greek history and stuff.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And just look at the way that we use and abuse energy.
Yeah. So which is the best-selling book of all of them? Or the best book, or both?
The book that sold the most probably was the book Tar Sands. And Empire of the Beetle has sold extremely well in the United States.
Okay.
and Empire of the Beetle would probably be one of my personal favorites, but I also think Energy of Slaves is a
I think it's
really cool book.
It's one of the best books I've ever read, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. You still do not quite mainstream journalism, but you do a lot of
really,
because you publish in the Tyee, which is an online news place, which I get every day. Thank you, for free. Thank you. Why hasn't the National Post come and asked you to write for them? To ask a question that begs the answer.
Well,
perhaps.
I mean, I used to write for those guys years
Yeah.
and years ago. I mean, I worked on a regular basis for the Globe and Mail. I would freelance sometimes for the
Yeah.
National Post, for the Toronto Star.
Yeah.
I've written for just about everybody in this country. But at this point in my life, I'm quite happy to be writing for the Tyee. I mean, the industry that I am part of is in complete transition.
Yeah.
And
Shrinking.
It is shrinking and becoming less responsive in many ways and less accountable as well. And I'm really not interested in working anymore for the mainstream press.
Interesting.
I don't think the mainstream press is doing its job, and its primary job is really to monitor power, the centers of power. So.
Well, welcome to community television. Shaw's Access program is what we're here for today. But I'm personally disturbed at the shrinking of the media too. Not just like, there's fewer corporates, but what they pay is it's very difficult to live on. And I wonder, is that like economics or is that deliberate politics from somewhere? What do you think?
I think what we are seeing with journalism is what we're going to see in a lot of different sectors in society as the world we have created, this very complex, energy-intensive world, begins to unravel. And I think we've begun this unraveling.
Yeah.
And I think journalism is just one of many casualties. I mean, there are many others, and I think there are all kinds of trades and professions are going to be affected by it.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing it first here. And then there's also just the whole impact of technology and social media on journalism as well.
In a way, there's better media and more media because there's so much homemade media that goes viral.
Yeah, I don't know if it's better. I don't know if it. I mean, it's more fragmented. Put it that way.
There's less fact checking too.
So it's incredibly fragmented, and I think what's interesting to me is that people have responded to this fragmentation in many ways, by actually abandoning the mainstream media because they don't trust it anymore. They think it's in too many deep pockets are controlling it. And so they get the average person now gets most of their information from their friends and from their family.
Yeah.
And they are in turn getting most of their information from social media and different sources on the internet.
More people heard about the death of John F. Kennedy by word of mouth than by media.
Yeah. Oh, and we're going back to we're almost going back to a Middle Ages kind of form of town crier communication, right? Where one person tells a few and a few people tell some more, and that's how words
Going to back up a bit. The Vancouver Sun, I used to work there. They've had some pretty good journalists over time, but in the last decade or so, I'd say the best ones, like David Baines, are gone. And the ones that remain there are the ones that don't rock the boat. There's an exception. Vaughn Palmer is still probably the best journalist, apart from you, in the province. But I don't know. It's distressing.
Yeah, definitely. If you're rocking the boat is not something that journalists are expected to do anymore.
And if you do anything that
your job is to keep that boat from rocking. That's what it's.
And if you do something that requires a lawyer's opinion, well, they don't want you to do that again.
Yeah.
Even if you were legally right to say what you've said, it's like, oh, we had to call the lawyers. And again, Mr. Twigg, I've never been sued, by the way. Segue.
Neither have I, John.
Awesome.
So.
Yeah, it helps when you get your facts right. Now, Paris is going on as we're interviewing here, the global conference on, climate change. What are your thoughts?
Well, I recently read a piece by James Hansen, the NASA scientist who sounded the alarm on climate change way back in 1988. In fact, it was earlier than that. And he sounded the alarm in the US Congress. And then 10 years later, or actually more than that, the Bush administration actually tried to silence him and said, look, you cannot use the word climate change and dangerous together.
That sounds like Harper and his scientists.
It does. And so he's very worried about what's going on in Paris because he thinks that there is one bold, fairly simple solution, and that is a dedicated carbon levy or fee at the point of mining or at the point of entry of where the hydrocarbons are coming into the country, and that this fee must go up every year and put into one pot, and that the dividends be given back to the citizens of whatever nation is embarking on this. Yeah. And he thinks that's the best way to get us off fossil fuels. And the point is to get us off fossil fuels in a rapid fashion.
How does that compare with BC's carbon tax?
Well, its carbon tax is a bit complicated. I haven't been able to figure it all out yet, and I really don't want to say too much about it, but this is not a tax. This is a levy, and then the levy is being given back to ordinary citizens to lower their carbon footprint and lower their energy intensity. Yeah. The less energy you spend, the more dividend you will get back. Okay. And I think this is a very powerful idea that really has to be part of any climate change program. Yeah. If we want to make any mileage at all in this thing. And so far we've had nearly 15 years of cap and trade and all kinds of other stuff, and emissions are soaring. Yeah. So obviously that's not the solution, and that's not the way to go. And yet in Paris, they're still talking cap and trade, and not only that, they're talking about carbon capture and storage, which is a technology that has not been proven, that comes with obscene costs, and that is a boondoggle from beginning to end. That somehow, okay, we think we can bury this problem and behave the same way. No, you cannot bury this problem, number one, without monitoring it for thousands of years underneath the ground. And two, we have to change our behaviors, the way we're using energy now.
Or switch to clean energy.
There's no such thing as clean energy, John.
Oh, sure there is. We got hydro right up here.
Well, but all energy comes with an ecological cost, right? Yeah. And so when you're damming lots of rivers, we killed lots of salmon and other things to do that.
Well, sorry folks, but the Campbell system is pretty healthy.
The Campbell system here is a nice system. But I still don't think people should think in terms of energy coming that is totally clean. It's not. Every energy comes with some kind of cost.
Everything's relative, including the 5 minutes we got left. When I saw the Paris conference, I heard a report that some of the financial backers included the major oil companies, plus Suez des Eaux, the big French water company. And, at the same time, this was in the context of, this event has already been captured by the corporate interests. I worry. I don't think that it's, I guess maybe they're trying, it's a good thing. But
the problem is, how do you get 195 countries to agree to a cap and trade program? So everyone has to agree on the rate, and then everyone has to agree on a time scale, and then how do you audit that and monitor that over time? Yeah, that's a very, very difficult process.
But isn't there, as I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, two big problems in the world: the pollution in China and the pollution in India?
Well, no, I think the biggest problem is the pollution that our ancestors in both England and the United States and North America have caused over the last 300 years. The problem started 400 years ago with the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, and that's energy as slaves.
The British Empire and the American Empire used up most of the world's carbon budget. So when you add it, when you look at all of this is cumulative. So when you look at it from a cumulative basis, the United States is responsible for 25% of the problem, and China is only responsible for 10%, and India is only responsible for 3%, right? And Japan has got a 7% responsibility, so does the UK and Germany. So
You know the numbers
it's
pretty
the
well.
yeah, it's the Industrial Revolution guys that really,
Yeah.
you know, and that's where you know, both Europe and North America need to be moral leaders in this, because we dirtied the atmosphere more than anyone else.
Okay. What's the future of civil society? Just a simple question.
Well, I think we're having problems keeping things civil, and I think hydraulic fracturing is a good example of this.
Yeah.
So here you have this highly disruptive technology that industrializes rural communities, that causes earthquakes, that is responsible for gas migration, and is a technology all about brute force, and that is delivering diminishing returns. So we're using more energy and capital to crack open rocks deep in the ground, which really are terrible, terrible rocks in terms of the amount of oil and gas they contain. And when communities say no to this technology, what happens? Well, the industry goes to government and passes a law that says, well, state law, you know, comes first, and no, as a municipality or as a city, you cannot control your own destiny.
Tough luck about your well.
When that happens, that's the end of civil society, right?
Yeah.
Because that's true democracy.
Yeah.
When a community gets together and says, you know what, maybe we don't want this technology.
Yeah.
So that's why civil society, I think, is increasingly becoming into trouble.
I respect your answer. You didn't mention Syria.
Well, there you have the collapse of civil society, and what happens when civil societies collapse.
Yeah.
All hell breaks loose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've heard some stuff about the Syrian crisis was triggered by the climate. Well, actually, happened is I've looked at it a little bit. Syria mismanaged their resources.
We have all mismanaged our resources, but you combine that with drought, and the drought is probably, in this case, driven in some way by climate change.
It exacerbated the existing mismanagement.
That's right.
Okay.
So it makes everything more fragile.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, John.
And thank you for watching Talk About here on Shaw TV North Island. If you want to listen and watch this again, Shaw has a website, a YouTube channel. So Google Shaw TV North Island and you will find John Twigg talking with Andrew Nikiforuk about the problems of the world. Thank you, Gord. Forgot to thank him on the last show. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Chaz. And thank you for watching.